the first scream wasn't from a person. It was the shrill, angry wail of a luxury sports car dying in the middle of a crowded downtown boulevard just as the morning sun painted the glass towers in gold. Hundreds of people stopped to stare. Phones came out. Drivers leaned on their horns. At the center of the growing crowd stood a confident young CEO beside her gleaming silver Porsche, frustration written across her face as smoke curled from beneath the hood. Then her eyes landed on a man pushing an old bicycle with a little girl's pink backpack tied to the back. His work clothes were stained with grease, his boots were worn almost through, and one small hand was wrapped tightly around his. The crowd laughed as the wealthy CEO jokingly tossed out a challenge that sounded more like an insult than an opportunity. She declared that if the poor mechanic could fix her Porsche on the spot, she would marry him. The laughter echoed through the street, but the single father simply smiled, rested his hand on the warm hood, and quietly opened it. In that instant, everything began to change. Before we continue, if you believe kindness still has the power to change lives and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Your support helps these heartfelt stories reach more people who need hope today. The man's name was Rowan Mercer, a 36-year-old single father whose life had been rebuilt from pieces most people would have thrown away. 5 years earlier he had lost his wife, Celine, to a sudden illness that emptied not only his heart but every dollar he had saved. Medical bills had taken the family home. His small neighborhood repair shop had closed after creditors arrived with paperwork instead of sympathy. Since then Rowan had lived in a tiny rented apartment with his 8-year-old daughter, Briar, whose cheerful smile somehow made even the hardest days feel possible. Every morning before sunrise he packed her lunch, braided her curly hair as best he could, walked her to school, and spent the day taking temporary repair jobs wherever anyone would hire him. His toolbox was older than some of the office workers who hurried past him every day, but inside it rested decades of knowledge passed down from his grandfather, a mechanic who believed every machine had a story if someone listened carefully enough. The woman standing beside the Porsche was named Vivian Ashcroft, founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the city. Newspapers celebrated her intelligence, magazines admired her wealth, and investors praised her fearless decisions. Yet very few people knew how lonely success had become. She trusted numbers more than people because numbers had never betrayed her. Every relationship had felt transactional. Every compliment seemed connected to her fortune. Behind designer clothes and polished confidence lived someone exhausted from pretending she never needed anyone. That morning she was rushing to an important charity presentation when her prized sports car suddenly lost power, leaving her trapped in traffic and surrounded by impatient strangers. Most of the crowd assumed Rowan was only pretending to know what he was doing. Some whispered that an expensive European engine could never be repaired by a poor roadside mechanic. Others laughed at his faded clothes while admiring the luxury badge on the front of the Porsche. Briar stood quietly beside her father, looking up at him with complete confidence. She had seen those hands repair bicycles, lawn mowers, delivery trucks, generators, and even antique engines that experienced mechanics had declared beyond saving. To her, there was nothing magical about her father's gift. It was simply who he was. Rowan leaned over the engine with extraordinary patience. He ignored the whispers, the cameras, and the laughter. Instead he listened. He watched the movement of belts, studied the color of a connector, smelled the faint trace of overheated wiring, and gently touched a loose electrical harness hidden beneath a protective cover. Within minutes he had identified a damaged connector that had shaken loose after striking a deep pothole several blocks away. Rather than replacing expensive parts, he carefully cleaned the contact, secured the connection using materials from his toolbox, and reset the electronic system. When he finally stepped back and closed the hood, silence settled over the crowd. Vivian turned the key expecting another failure. Instead the Porsche roared to life with the smooth confidence it had possessed the day she bought it. Even the engine sounded calmer. The traffic officer standing nearby smiled. Drivers who had been complaining only moments earlier applauded. Several people who had mocked Rowan lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Briar clapped louder than anyone else, her face glowing with pride as though she had always known the ending. Vivian's smile slowly disappeared, replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Respect. She looked at Rowan differently now. The joke she had made moments earlier suddenly felt childish. She offered him a generous stack of cash, assuming money would erase the awkwardness of her careless words. Rowan accepted only enough to cover the repair materials and politely refused everything else. He explained that he charged people for honest work, not for public embarrassment or expensive badges on the front of their cars. Those words landed far more heavily than any insult could have. As Rowan prepared to leave with Briar, Vivian noticed the little girl's shoes. The soles had been carefully stitched together by hand. Her school uniform had been washed so many times that the colors had begun to fade, yet it was spotless. Everything about the child reflected love rather than poverty. Something inside Vivian shifted. The next afternoon curiosity led her to search for Rowan. Instead of finding a successful repair shop, she found him working beneath the shade of a temporary canvas shelter in the corner of an old service station that another mechanic allowed him to use during the day. Customers came because word had spread that Rowan could solve problems other garages could not. He never overcharged. He explained every repair honestly. If someone could not afford the work, he quietly found a way to help anyway. More than once Vivian watched him repair elderly customers' vehicles for free while pretending the parts had been discounted. The more she observed, the more uncomfortable she became with her own assumptions about success. She had spent years measuring people by appearance, education, and financial achievement. Rowan possessed none of the symbols her world admired, yet he carried something far rarer. Character. Several weeks later a powerful storm swept through the city during the middle of a bright afternoon, flooding roads and leaving countless vehicles stranded. Rowan worked without stopping for nearly 14 hours, helping families restart engines, pushing cars out of rising water, and refusing payment from parents traveling with children. Briar sat beneath the shelter reading library books while proudly handing bottled water to exhausted drivers. Vivian happened to witness the entire scene after her company office lost power. Watching father and daughter serve strangers despite having so little themselves stirred emotions she had buried beneath years of ambition. She quietly arranged for Rowan to receive an invitation to interview for the position of Chief Maintenance Supervisor at her corporate headquarters, a role with excellent pay, health insurance, and steady hours. Rowan almost declined because he feared office work would separate him from repairing engines, but Briar reminded him that stable work meant fewer nights worrying about rent. He accepted. Within months Rowan transformed the company's neglected vehicle fleet, reducing repair costs dramatically simply through preventative maintenance and honest management. Employees admired how he greeted everyone with the same kindness, whether they were executives or cleaners. He remembered birthdays, repaired interns' bicycles after work, and even organized free weekend classes teaching teenagers basic automotive skills. Productivity improved not because of expensive programs but because kindness slowly became contagious. Vivian found herself spending more time in the maintenance department than in her executive office. She admired Rowan's quiet leadership. He never sought praise. Every success belonged to the team. Every mistake belonged to him. Watching Briar do homework in the company cafeteria after school reminded Vivian that wealth alone had never created the warmth missing from her own life. One afternoon she visited Rowan's modest apartment to deliver documents he had forgotten. The home was tiny, but every wall displayed handmade drawings, family photographs, and memories created with love rather than money. She realized that despite owning penthouses, vacation homes, and luxury cars, she had never experienced a place that felt so alive. Months passed before Vivian finally admitted to herself that the roadside joke she once made had become something entirely different. She no longer admired Rowan because he had fixed a Porsche. She admired him because he repaired broken confidence wherever he went. He reminded people that dignity did not depend on income. He taught an entire company that leadership begins with humility. When the company celebrated its annual charity gala, Vivian surprised every guest by inviting Rowan and Briar onto the stage. Instead of praising profits, she told the story of the mechanic who had taught her the greatest lesson of her career. She confessed that she had once judged a man by his clothes instead of his character, and that the greatest investment she had ever made was learning to value people before possessions. The audience stood together in thunderous applause, many with tears in their eyes. If this story has touched your heart and reminded you that kindness can change lives in ways money never can, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Your support helps keep stories of hope, compassion, and second chances alive. Special request: tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone whose kindness completely changed your life? As the golden afternoon sun settled behind the skyline, Rowan walked home beside Briar, holding her hand exactly as he had on the day the Porsche broke down. His life had changed, but not because of luck or wealth. It had changed because he never allowed hardship to steal his compassion. The luxury car that once represented a world beyond his reach had become only a memory, while the values he carried every day became the true engine driving everyone around him toward a better future. And in a city that had once laughed at a poor single father beside a broken Porsche, people now remembered him not as the man who fixed an expensive car, but as the man who quietly repaired hearts wherever he went.